Thomas and Friends' Big World, Big Adventures is bad. It's just bad. The movie and the show. It is factually bad. And I can say with absolute certainty, it is factually bad because it literally killed the show. It's going on hiatus, people. It alienated its audience and it is no longer making money as a result of this bad decision. The show is on the verge of being over forever. The objectively worst thing that could ever happen to the show has happened. When Big World Big Adventures first came out in 2018, it was at a time where I was distancing myself from Thomas. I didn't want anything to do with it, so I didn't watch the show. I did watch a cam rip of the movie that I only sort of paid attention to while watching, and then caught wind of anything interesting happening in the episodes from Friends. Until a certain point, I hadn't watched a lot of it, but for this video, I actually sat down and watched the entirety of it. Yes, I put myself through hell and back for this video to make sure I'm accurate. That's the movie, 2 whole seasons, and 3 specials worth of content I sat through to write this. We're all stuck inside during this quarantine anyways, so it's not like I had anything else better to do. I could have read a book, or gotten back into working out, or made some progress on my portfolio, but no. I decided to willingly torture myself with Thomas the Train episodes I knew I would dislike going in. A man has to have his priorities straight, you know? I clearly don't. I want to talk in detail about why BWBA exists at all, and its biggest problems, talk about some of the good stuff in it, and then I want to discuss ways of how to improve this mess. I'm a firm believer that a talented writer can make any story concept work, and I think BWBA could have potentially worked if it was approached differently. These are all, of course, just my opinions, but that doesn't mean you are wrong if you would disagree with any of what I say. Feel free to disagree. It's the internet. It's a free place where you can have your own opinions on anything. A place where I can sit and make analytical videos about Thomas the Train in a professional essay. Wait, what am I talking about? So, disclaimer. I actually wrote the entire script for this video back in May, when we first heard season 24 wouldn't be out until September. I thought this video would be season 22 and 23 centric only, and that perhaps I would do a follow-up video once season 24 was out. And I was about halfway through editing this when Australia decided to drop all of season 24 out of the woodwork. So I decided that it would just be smarter to wait until the season had concluded and make this a be-all, end-all video to BWBA in its entirety. The video has been edited in parts to accommodate season 24, so excuse any differences in audio. There very much are bits of audio in this video that were recorded a good 3 months apart. Granted, season 24 didn't really change my mind on BWBA, like, at all, but there are some things in it worth mentioning. And yes, I'm going to be calling Big World Big Adventures by its acronym, BWBA, because it's easier to say and because I think it's funny. So, let's begin. How did we get here? Okay, so before I get into it, we have to preface what BWBA is and why it exists. How did we get to this point? Thomas and Friends' Big World, Big Adventures is essentially a rebrand of the Thomas franchise to make it more marketable and of this generation. Merchandise sales started drastically dropping in 2015, 2016 or so, and seemingly Mattel was hesitant to continue the series going after the 20th season, as confirmed by Ryan Hagan on SIF ages ago. Journey Beyond Sodor came out later that year after season 20, and part of me wonders if it was originally written as a finale. It definitely has a sense of finality to it, and I have a theory that they retrofitted it to include the new BWBA elements like the body gesturing, etc. in the 11th hour after BWBA was greenlit that year. The animation company also faced bankruptcy issues that same year, which obviously didn't help. I would kill to know the full story of what went down in 2017. BWBA was the brainchild of then producers Ian McHugh and Michaela Winter, who came up with the idea to have Thomas go around the world and literally go to the countries in the show that Mattel wanted to expand the brand in. They also pitched adding gender equality to the STEAM team by removing characters and introducing new girl ones. This rebrand would also feature other notable visual changes, such as adding the dreaded body movements to the characters, removing the narrator and having Thomas himself break the fourth wall to introduce the episodes to the audience, the addition of pointless fantasy sequences in every single episode, and speed up the pacing so the stories aren't quote-unquote dull. They wanted to essentially dumb down the content as much as they could so really young general audiences could grasp what was happening. AKA, turn it into the same mindless drivel as its top competitors. You throw all this crap into a blender and bada bing, bada boom, you have BWBA.
Don't breathe this.
We first caught wind of this reboot via articles in 2017, right before Journey Beyond Sodor came out. It was met with a lot of criticism from fans, but I think ultimately fans didn't want to believe it was true. Like Thomas going around the world and half the episodes would take place in different countries? Edward and Henry being replaced by random new girl characters? Thomas himself being the narrator?
What?
These changes sounded so insane that they couldn't possibly be real. Then we saw the engines gesturing in Journey Beyond Sodor, and I think that's when it started to hit us. Then we got season 21 shortly after, and that episode happened. Everything we feared started to become real instantaneously. Begun, the BWBA reboot has. The good stuff. Before I get into the major problems with BWBA, I want to briefly mention some of the positives. Because as terrible as BWBA is, it ain't all bad. It's like 90% bad with 10% some golden nuggets. Don't take what I say here as justification for BWBA existing, because it's not. A 10% is still an abysmal failure, but I don't see any harm in talking about what that 10% is. I think it goes without saying that the Michael White episodes are the best ones the saga has to offer. His episodes really show the benefit of having an actual fan write for the show. The humor and that style of dialogue in Audrey's writings are very much present in these episodes, and they just feel different to the others. Like, watch Heart of Gold and an international one back to back, and the difference is as clear as day. One feels like it's written by someone who cares, and the other feels like it was written out of obligation for a generic preschool kids show number 162. If Michael wrote every episode of the last 3 seasons, I might not even be making this video right now. I think honestly my favorite episode of the bunch is Free the Roads. That feels like a story plucked right out of season 20. Hunt the Truck was also incredibly good. The Great Little Railway Show was a really fun novelty featuring many obscure characters we'll probably never ever see again. And despite its visual shortcomings, the Royal Engine wasn't half bad. I also like how so many of the Sodor eps, at least in seasons 22 and 23, are devoted to side characters. While I do think it's kind of dumb to take attention away from your main cast that have already been reduced to appearing in half the season only, it's still nice to see the side characters in the limelight. The fact we got episodes with Bill and Ben, Doc, Merlin, Rosie, Samson, Bulgy, and the pack and leads in this era, pretty amazing to me. Not saying they're all good or anything, but I do like that the side characters are still very much a part of the cast. What I don't understand, though, is how characters like Bulgy or Big Frickin' Mickey can get notable amounts of screen time during this era, and Edward and Henry aren't even allowed to speak, but whatever. Don't worry, I'll get to that. I think the lack of a narrator in the movie worked pretty well. It might be the only positive thing I have to say about the movie. It's the only production in Thomas to not have a narrator, and it works just fine without one. It's a shame they went and made Thomas the narrator in the seasons following, because I think the episodes would be so much more palpable without stupid Thomas and his stupid face and his stupid voice telling us what's happening. I like that San Francisco appeared at one point. Yeah, that's biased, but you know what? I'm from here, so it was neat. Even though the set for it sucks, there is literally nothing but beach on the west side of the Golden Gate Bridge in real life. If you animators bothered to do 3 seconds of research on Google Maps before building the set, you'd know that. What else? The episode where Trevor randomly has this ginormous sounding whistle was kind of novel. Someone behind the scenes thought that was really funny. This one shot of Bulgy trying to peddle free rides to people made me laugh. As did this scene.
Gordon! No! Right.
And, that song in the Steam Team special wasn't bad. I think that's it.
That's it?
Why BWBA sucks. Alright, let's get into what you all came here for. The juicy, succulent reasons for why BWBA is terrible.
It was terrible. Terrible.
Believe it or not, I don't think the concept of BWBA is inherently bad. It's just horrifically realized. It's plagued with problems. All ones that were created intentionally, and that's why they're so infuriating. I could spend hours talking about all the little problems with BWBA, but that's not going to fix anything. For the sake of this video, I've deduced the major problems with BWBA to 3. 1. The international episodes are pointless. This is objectively the biggest problem with the reboot, and the thing I think most fans agree is the least enticing aspect about it. The international episodes have to exist because of how Ian McHugh pitched the reboot to Mattel. They wanted to literally take Thomas to the countries in the show they wanted to expand the brand in. On the press release for BWBA back in 2017, Ian McHugh says they had this idea because of some kid they interviewed, who they don't even name, that said, and I quote, "Trains go places, but Thomas doesn't go anywhere."
You serious?
And this, ladies and gentlemen, this is what they use as justification for the international crap. What an awful, awful, extremely thin excuse to hang your entire rebrand on. Gee, it kind of makes you wonder if that story with the kid they specifically don't name was like completely phony or something.
But the Reverend Wilbert Autry wrote in the books that Thomas always wanted to see the world. That means we can use that single line of dialogue from 73 years ago that Thomas never says again to justify our decision to rebrand the show now. Literally going around the world was what he meant when he said that. This is what Autry wanted.
Shut up! Just shut up!
Regardless, the episodes exist. Thomas ventures to 5 different countries in the show, as well as Africa and the United States in the movie. Again, I iterate, I don't think the concept is bad. Taking Thomas around the world could be interesting if it was approached right, but it's not. Simple as. In the canon of the show, Thomas is in these countries for no given reason. And that's the underlying problem with them. The closest we get to any explanation for his being there is that he had a new job there.
I had an exciting new job working in Italy.
Like, what? That's it? That's all we get? And I'm pretty sure they only say that once, maybe twice. Was no thought put into these episodes at all. They spent God knows how much money rebranding the show into this, and they couldn't take 5 minutes to come up with a reason. Also, are the ventures in the show a separate trip from the movie? Because he comes back at the end of the movie, and Nia's with him the whole time then. So Thomas went around the world twice then? Why is none of this clear? As a result, the episodes just feel pointless. Without as much as a simple reason for Thomas being there, there's nothing about them to get invested in. It's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it makes them that much easier to ignore and push them off as not canon. I mean, it's hard to get upset over them if they have no effect on the canon of the show, right? I view them the same way I view like Magic Railroad. It's not canon, so I don't care. But it's a curse because this is half the show now. 13 of the annual 26 episodes are about nothing. It's kind of hard to get excited for new content each year when you know half of it going in is just going to be mundane mush. Point is, the international episodes have nothing in them worth grabbing the audience's attention. There's no hook, and it's a little frustrating because there easily could be. Anything as simple as just giving Thomas a reason for being there or including more integral cast members would help. I do think the Italy episodes are a bit more notable in this instance, because they did try to incorporate the pack into them. You know, so are characters we care about. It's absolutely nonsensical how they got them there, but at least it was something. Fleshing out the international cast would help too. None of these characters feel like that they were inspired. They feel like they were invented out of obligation, just to give Thomas someone to talk to. The overwhelming majority of them are so one note and forgettable. What's this character's name? I don't know. How about this one? Or how about this one? Or this one? Do they even say half of these characters' names on screen? Why not have episodes that focus on them, instead of having Thomas be the main in every single one? Fleshing these characters out would make fans like them a little more, and thus make us care a little bit more about the episodes. And lo and behold, this is actually something they improved on in season 24. The episode with Yong Bao and his origins was actually legitimately good. They wrote him like a character with some depth, and now I actually want to see him again. Why on earth they decided to do this now, at the tail end of the BWBA saga, instead of up front in season 22, I'll never know. Just incredibly bad decision making. It also doesn't help that these episodes are incredibly stereotypical. Everything they teach us culture-wise is the most obvious, on-the-nose stuff ever. The show is, or was at one point, about trains, and bringing Thomas to countries that have these very well-known, vastly different railway networks is an opportunity to highlight some of the more interesting aspects about them. Like, oh man, Thomas is going to China. I wonder if they'll do something with China's famous bullet train system, or, oh, he does Tai Chi and sees a panda. How innovative. Oh, neat! Thomas is going to India! I wonder if we'll see him interact with some of the cool mountain railways and, oh, he plays with monkeys. I'm learning so much about these different cultures! The episodes are just so stereotypical and, dare I say, borderline racist with how they portray the countries. Everyone in Brazil loves football. Everyone in Italy sings opera and talks like Mario. The entirety of India looks like a slum. Australia is just a giant desert in the middle of nowhere with nothing in it. Aren't they trying to appeal to these countries? What about these countries are these episodes supposed to be highlighting? And most importantly, what's the point of any of this? If they're just trying to teach kids about the most surface level stuff about different cultures, is Thomas the Train really the proper vessel for it? Like, why on earth would you use a train to teach kids about Tai Chi or tiger poaching? Like, what? And if the whole point of bringing Thomas to these specific countries was so they could expand the brand in them in real life, did they think the correct course of action of doing that was to tell these countries' audiences the most basic stuff about their own cultures? It's literally the same as if they did an episode to appeal to America by bringing Thomas to the States and having him learn about baseball and cowboys. Oh, for God's sakes. I hate to say it, but I think part of the reason these come off as so fake and forced is because the writing staff aren't diverse themselves. When you think of a middle-class, westernized white person writing a story about India, this is basically that. Absolutely surface level. This is so detrimental because these international episodes are supposed to be the springboard for this whole rebrand. It's supposed to be Thomas proving to the world that this brand is inclusive and progressive, only to have that completely squandered because the episodes feel like they were written by people in a bubble that have never been to these countries and did minimal online research about them. I'm not saying that they should have been hiring writers solely for the color of their skin, because that is discriminatory, of course. But when they're doing episodes about different cultures in different countries, consulting people who are of those cultures and from those countries is probably pretty freaking crucial, don't you think? They actually got an Australian writer to write the Australia episodes. Why didn't they consult an Indian writer for the India episodes, or a Chinese writer for the China ones? Like, did they really think a Chinese person would watch the China episode about a panda and think, yeah, I can relate to this. I'm from China and I know what a panda is. I definitely want to watch more of this show about a talking British train in my country now. Yeah, they sure did. 2. Nia and Rebecca are bad, forced characters. I already know I'm going to get hate for this. Nia and Rebecca have their fans, for some reason. If you like these characters, that's fine. I'm not trying to say you're wrong for liking them. Maybe you like them purely for aesthetics. I don't know. Just personally, I don't get it, and I'll explain why. Nia and Rebecca exist because Ian McHugh and Michaela Winter pitched adding gender equality into the main cast. So they took out the 2 most boring males, threw them in the trash, and added these vanilla basic girl characters into the mix and told fans to accept them. Why they had to use completely new girl characters is absolutely beyond me. There's a plethora of already established girls they could have used. They had just reintroduced Rosie right before this. They had been pushing Daisy really hard. They could have used this opportunity to bring back forgotten girls like Molly or someone back too. But no one cares anymore, so we got these 2. And don't misconstrue what I'm saying here. I have no problem with girl characters. I don't think any fan does. There have been girl characters in Thomas since the books, and they've consistently introduced more females in more recent seasons. A lot of them are really good characters. They really pushed Daisy in the Brenner era. She's a fantastic character. Annie and Clarabelle were really pushed too, and the show is now at a point where it just can't exist without them. Marion, Millie, Caitlin are also really well written and fun. And not to mention Emily, who's been at the forefront of the series for 17 years now. Girl characters have always been a thing in Thomas, and I really don't get why this is only a problem now all of a sudden. The articles about BWBA try to have you think that Thomas never had female representation at all prior to this. Wouldn't a simpler solution to showing more female representation just to make more episodes with female leads? Half of Season 21's episodes were female-led. I don't think any fan had a problem with that at all. I have no issue with adding more females to the cast or giving more episodes to female characters. But what I do have a problem with is badly written, forced characters that they tell us to accept with no exceptions. Enter Nia and Rebecca. Let's start with Nia. It's funny, Nia should be the more interesting one because she had a whole movie before joining the main cast. And you know what? She actually wasn't that bad in the movie, and I attribute that to Brenner's writing talents. She worked in the movie because they had this very unique ensemble with Thomas, Lightning McQueen, and then Nia. It was a unique, diverse, one-off trio, so it kind of worked. But in the show, she feels so out of place on Sodor in her spot alongside the main cast. And the reason she feels so out of place is, and I'm just going to say it, she's just a diversity tick on a checklist. Pretty off-putting when you have a whole group of just, generic-looking trains with faces with no implication of race or ethnicity at all. And then there's the obviously ethnic one that sticks out like a sore thumb. Yeah, you guys are oh so progressive now with your single token diversity character. You're just as progressive as Family Guy is. Well done. I know we're starting to get into touchy territory here, and I'm going to try my best to word my problems with this character. I want to make it clear that I have no problem with diversity in children's shows or really any sort of media, especially one about talking choo-choo trains. When worked organically into anything, it's something that can be really great. The problem I have with Nia specifically is that they designed her to be the obvious token diversity one from day one, and now she's stuck with that label. She was screwed over since the drawing board. From the facial design to the most obnoxious, obvious livery possible, it's clear that they wanted to label her as a diversity standout so they can give the illusion to normies who glance at Thomas that it's a wholesome, inclusive brand. It's all about labels, people. That's where we're at. And frankly, putting an obvious label on someone is pretty offensive. Do you really want the first thing for people to think of when they look at this character to be, oh, that's the ethnic one? Wouldn't you rather them think, oh, that's the pompous one, or oh, that's the devious scheming one, or oh, that's the smug vain one? You know, something reflective of a unique personality and not what their supposed race is? Why this is so baffling to me is because this isn't a new concept to Thomas. Thomas has had diverse characters before in the past, and they've always gone over really well with people. Remember Hero? Remember Victor? These are both diverse characters, but everyone loves them. Why do Hero and Victor work, but Nia doesn't? Well, first off, neither of them replaced anyone. I think that's pretty important to mention. Henry didn't stop appearing once Hero was introduced. Second is their designs. Both of their designs are subtle and don't immediately label them. Hero's design is really elegant. He looks like some grandiose, powerful steam engine. He's not brightly painted in the colors of the Japanese flag. And lastly, and most importantly, these two work because the diversity angle isn't the defining trait of each of their characters. It's a part of them, yes, and they have done interesting episodes with the concept of them being from different countries. But both Hero and Victor have more going on than just that. Hero is a very determined and wise character. Henry's Hero is Hero's best episode in my opinion. It's a showcase of everything he's about. That he's so strong, a dedicated worker, and he doesn't give up easily. He sees through it to the end, no matter the consequences. He doesn't call his friends out when they're being lazy. He uses his words and encourages them. Victor is wonderful too. He's not a main very often, but when he is, his episodes are always standouts. I love the episode where we learn Victor has a very heated disdain for snow, and it makes sense. I mean, he's from a country where it never snows. But he braves it without hesitation when he thinks his friend is in trouble. What a champ. And God, need I even mention Blue Mountain Mystery, where the whole concept of Victor being from another country was the grounds for the story, and they played it out in a very respectful way that gave him so much more depth as a character and made him very sympathetic. It's a pretty damning testament to how far the show has fallen in current day when I'm using characters from the Sharon Miller era as positive examples. Nia being from Kenya and migrating to Sodor is a really good concept for a new character. There's nothing inherently bad about that, and if anything, it should be grounds for making her an incredibly fascinating and interesting character, one like we've never had before. Hero and Victor are proof of that. Think about all the story ideas you can come up with such a concept. You can have episodes that show her struggling with culture shock, or her using her differences in cultural knowledge to solve a problem the others can't, her discovering new phenomenon she didn't have in Africa, like snow for instance. How fun would an episode about Nia dealing with snow for the first time be? But the problem is they don't ever do anything with this concept that they pushed so hard in the marketing. Nia is used pretty well in the movie, I'll give her that, but once she's on Sodor, it's like they just forget what she's about and she's written as generically and blandly as anyone else. They fail to give her any kind of unique personality traits exclusive to her. It's incredibly obvious the writing staff either don't know how to write for a character like this, or they're just lazy and don't care because they always fall back on the crutch of only mentioning she's from another country. So much so that they have her mention it constantly in mundane dialogue scenes that have nothing to do with her.
Oh, I love the snow. I never saw it in Kenya. These trucks sound much more troublesome than the trucks where I come from.
Or about the animals in Africa.
And not to mention, that's the main thing they push with her in every single marketing promo.
I'm a tank engine from Kenya in Africa.
Nia is a steam engine from Kenya, is a mixed traffic tank engine from Kenya in Africa. Who's from Kenya in Africa?
Okay, we get it. Mentioning it all the time is so fruitless unless you actually do something with the concept. Otherwise, why does it matter? To their credit, they did try to use Nia being from a different country as a foundation to take her character a little further, albeit they only did this once. There's an episode where she struggles to read English numbers and has an accident as a result of missing a speed sign. It's honestly kind of interesting in concept, but it's bad in execution. What could have been a neat story about Nia dealing with culture shock just turned into crappy mush that teaches babies how to count to 10. The only time you tried to do something interesting with Nia, and you squandered it. Great job. See, this is the kind of stuff I would have wanted to see explored more with Nia, but they only did this once, and the episode was really bad. Taking anything related to being from Kenya aside, what else is there to Nia that defines her? She's friendly, she's helpful, and she likes to laugh. Yeah, very, very unique. Really interesting character there. No other characters on Thomas have those traits. None at all. Definitely a better character than that boring old blue train that came before, am I right? I don't dislike Nia solely because she replaced that blue train. I mean, my bias, of course, is going to dictate I have some sort of disdain for any character that replaced him. However, if Nia proved to be really interesting and likable, then maybe I could see myself excusing her replacing the old fart. But the fact of the matter is, they simply don't. And I don't get how anyone, longtime fan or just some general kid, could say they prefer Nia over him. I don't believe Nia is inherently a bad character in concept. The framework for a really interesting character is there, more so than Rebecca by a long shot. My problems with her come from her incredibly obvious label of a design and the writer's laziness and unwillingness to put in the time to do something unique and exclusive with her. If for some reason the show does continue, and they can find something really interesting to do with Nia, then maybe her spot in the show would be more deserved. But they are really going to have to try harder. And frankly, I don't have enough faith in the current team that they can pull through on that. Okay, now Rebecca. There's not as much to talk about with Rebecca, but I think I dislike her even more than Nia. She, weirdly, kind of fits in, at least from an aesthetic standpoint, but she suffers from the same lazy writing as Nia does. I have two big issues with her, and I'm not sure which is more daunting. The first one is that she appears out of quite literally nowhere, and she's just thrown into the main cast with no build-up or time for fans to get to know the character. She just shows up, and in the very next scene, she's literally in Tidmouth Sheds. No build-up, no time spent getting to know her at all. Why is this all so rushed? It infuriates me. Nia, at least, got a whole movie to introduce her. I hate it when shows tell their audience they have to love something they majorly changed on a whim, and to accept it without giving us a reason to. And that brings me to my second issue. There is no reason to accept Rebecca as a main because there's nothing to her. She's just the generic happy-go-lucky friendly type. A type that could easily be swapped out in any story with any other happy-go-lucky character type. Any episode you do with Rebecca, you could also do with Emily or Caitlin or Molly or someone. Rebecca has no flaws. She has no character development. She's popular and everyone loves her and everything just always works out fine for her.
Yay, me!
I might have a slightly different view of her if they put her through some sort of trial. Perhaps an episode where she really messes up and angers Sir Topham Hatt. And then a second episode where she really proves herself and makes up for it. You know, a character arc? Something. Anything that justifies her as a main character. But as it is, there's nothing going on with this character. She's as shallow as the likes of Charlie or Stanley or any of the background engines that no one cares about. Just because she talks more does not mean that she has more going on than them. Frickin' Philip, the spawn of Satan himself, Philip, has more going on than Rebecca. Rebecca is also frustrating because the type of train she is has a lot of potential storytelling opportunities, and they choose not to take advantage of it. There's now a second Pacific permanently on Sodor. Gordon's got some competition now. Not to mention, they chose a very unique and odd basis for her, with a lot of real-life quirks that could play into her character and make her interesting. But writing is too hard, and they'd rather just not try and resort to Rebecca just being generic happy and go lucky. Why make her a very specific type of train if you have no storytelling reason for it? I know I'm coming off incredibly harsh on these two, but I feel it's completely justified. These are meant to be main characters and should be held to the highest standard. And so far, in all 3 seasons of BWBA, they've done nothing to prove to me these two warrant replacing 2 legends like Edward and Henry. Within the first 3 seasons of Thomas, Henry got shut up in a tunnel for being selfish and then redeemed himself by rescuing a train, had an entire multi-episode arc where he tried very hard to prove his worth, crashed, and was eventually sent away to be rebuilt, and on his return proved to be an engine that can give Gordon a run for his money, which kicked off a sort of ongoing sibling rivalry between the two, was involved in several confrontations regarding the big engines and other characters, and we saw the more softer side of him when he was distraught about the forest getting wrecked, showing us that Henry is actually a bit more of a complex character than just grumpy big engine. And what about Edward? In 3 seasons, Edward gained a branch line, proved himself a hero to Sir Topham Hatt and the other engines through multiple trials, one of which he damaged himself horribly in a storm and still pressed on, and another in which he rescued a runaway James in an exciting high-speed chase that literally wore him out, played his part in saving another fellow steam engine from the scrapyard, and in multiple episodes we see the more stern side of him where he's not afraid to tell off others when they're acting like idiots. What did Nia and Rebecca do in 3 seasons? Diddly f***ing squat. It makes me so upset that these 2 non-entities with nothing to them are the replacements for Edward and Henry, 2 of the oldest characters in the franchise with so much history and development to them. Speaking of which, number 3, Edward and Henry are horribly mistreated. This is, in my opinion, the worst thing about BWBA. You know, no matter how stupid the show gets, no matter how unrealistic something in the show is, I always somehow manage to look past it eventually and keep watching. I got through the Sharon Miller era, for goodness sake.
I make good decisions, that's what I was told. I will not be fearful, I'll be brave and bold.
Ugh. But I don't know, man. Writing Edward and Henry off the show, 2 of Audrey's original 3, that is crossing a new line I didn't even know was possible. The idea to write them off sprung from wanting to make 2 new girl characters prominent in the main cast because they wanted to add more gender equality.
Oh crap.
Ian thought.
Which 2 characters do we write off?
Edward was the obvious first one. He's the one they hardly do anything with now. On some level, I sort of get it with Edward. Even in the classic series, he only appeared sometimes. He was a core member, but he was never as prominent as the others. But whenever there was a big, pivotal moment in the show, they always knew to include him. In recent years, though, it's apparent that they struggle with Edward. So, they wrote him off. But they still needed to get rid of 1 more. So who do you write off? Well, you can't get rid of Thomas, Percy, or James. Gordon is too popular. And you need to keep Emily 'cause girl. So, sorry, Henry. Henry getting written off was a weird decision because he's also popular. He's such a known one with the general public. He's the one that died of starvation in the tunnel. And he consistently leads in multiple episodes per season. I'm sure they would have kept him if they could, but they needed 3 girls out of the 7, so as the 5th boy, Henry had to go. Why they couldn't just add an 8th berth to the shed and keep Henry there, I'll never know. Ian McHugh himself said, on video, this:
So we're able to keep all those wonderful characters. Henry and Edward, still very much part of the show and will be seen working on the railway as usual.
Why are you such a liar? Let's talk about what a berth at Tidmouth Shed signifies. In the classic seasons, the shed was treated in a more realistic light. It was just a train shed, and whoever was in the yard at the time stayed there. There wasn't a confirmed list of engines who lived at Tidmouth, but for the most part it was usually our main characters. And honestly, I like this treatment a lot more, as it allows for more varied character interaction. Tidmouth Sheds becoming the main hub for our main cast was a product of the hit era, and has remained so ever since. This is the location where our main characters all interact at once, which made it special. It's the only place we saw all our main characters at the same time, each giving their unique 2 cents on whatever situation was currently happening. Whether it was a discussion about being replaced by something, or teasing someone for being silly, or just recapping the day's events. If a character had a berth at Tidmouth Sheds, it meant they were of a certain untouchable status. They're a main character, they're a constant. It's a visual procurement that these characters will be mainstays in the show, always. Then BWBA happened and they threw all that out the window. Edward and Henry were both written out and they were replaced immediately by Nia and Rebecca. And when they first did it, everyone had the same fear. If they're not procured at the main hub anymore, does that mean there's a possibility they won't appear again? Of course not. It's Edward and Henry. They're untouchable. They did a lot with Edward in season 22. That's something. They would never dare to let them not appear in the show. They really did just want to throw these two in the trash and be rid of them. Season 23 was abysmal. Henry appears in one episode for one scene where he has no lines of dialogue, and Edward appears on screen for 0.8 seconds in a musical number in some quick panning shot where we can't even see him properly. This shot right here, is Edward's only frickin' appearance in the entirety of the season. I mean, how can frickin' Bulgy have a whole episode to himself in season 23, and Henry and Edward can't even get dialogue? Just how? I'll never understand what the thought process was. I personally think Mattel told the writers to not use them. Why are they afraid to use them as secondary characters? What's the deal? What exactly is the benefit of this if you're still going to push background characters in lead roles? Are you intentionally trying to make everyone forget about them? Because that's what it seems like. When some nothing character like Stanley or Captain, frickin' Captain the Lifeboat, has more lines of dialogue in a season than Edward and Henry combined, that's really, really bad.
Henry and Edward, still very much part of the show, 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 very much part of the show, very much part of the show, part of the show, part of the show, part of the show, part of the show.
That's the stupidest bullshit I've ever heard.
But you know what? It's not the fact they demoted them to tertiary nothing characters that infuriates me. It's not even the fact that they don't appear anymore. If anything, I should be happy that they're both out of the line of fire with these ridiculous episodes. But no. What infuriates me about this the most is the way they did it. These two legendary characters of 75 years deserve the best frickin' send-offs you could have possibly given them. What Edward and Henry needed was a glorious swan song that ended their tenures. A really great, grandiose moment where their characters shined and then they took their leaves. It could have been in the same episode if it was done right. Imagine if they finally adapted like Super Rescue for TV in season 21 as the finale episode. The most universally loved Railway series story there is. And that was the episode Henry went out on. I don't think you could have done it any better. So what did we get? What were Edward and Henry's grand send-offs? Edward got a mediocre episode about sharing a shed with Philip and then left Tidmouth in the last 30 seconds on the spot, and none of his friends cared. No one objects. No one is sad. The literal first thing that is said as soon as he's out of earshot is,
I wonder who will be joining us here at Tidmouth Sheds.
Gee, I wonder who will replace him. Disgusting. And Henry got nothing. They didn't even bother giving Henry anything.
And Sir Topham Hatt says I can stay in the sheds in Vickerstown from now on. What?
They wrote him out with a single line of dialogue. This was all so rushed, so poorly thought out, and so insulting to the fans watching. You cannot tell me that they don't have the fans in mind when they're writing these episodes. They would not have brought back Bulgy or Terrence or given Big frickin' Mickey a face if they weren't thinking about the fans.
We love the fans very much. If it weren't for them, Thomas wouldn't have lasted as long as it did because of them. We always ensure we're doing the right thing. Oh wait, never mind. We actually don't care and they should go watch something else.
Thank you, Ian McHugh. You are great. If you want to write out these characters, fine. I can sort of understand the reasoning in Edward's case. But if it absolutely has to be done, do it in a way that is respectful to them and their legacies. Don't throw them to the side and then lie to fans that they're still major players when it's completely obvious to anyone with their eyes open that they're not. Nothing in the show has ever made me more upset than this. Nothing. This struck a nerve because it is the greatest and most offensive instance of a much, much bigger problem with how the owners treat this franchise. The problem that Mattel thinks it can just absolutely bastardize this brand's legacy, source material, and fandom, and completely get away with it because they stamp some BS reason on it that will give them good boy brownie points and headlines. Because if we do it in the name of progressiveness, then we can do whatever the flying fuck we want. Nothing is sacred. And the incredibly sad part is, it works. People fall for it. It's all about good press, and that's it. It's all fake, it's all a sham. Mattel doesn't care about these characters. They don't give a crap about respecting the source material, and they don't have any interest in making these replacement characters well developed. It's all about trying to look good and progressive and inclusive without actually being good or actually progressive and inclusive. Look at us, we dedicated half our seasons to international episodes to include other cultures. Look how inclusive we are, despite the fact we know nothing about these countries and everything we depict in them is absolutely surface level and borderline stereotyping. Look at us, we added more girls to our main cast. Aren't we so accepting? They're just lazy, generic, cookie cutter, happy characters with no unique defining personality traits, but, one of them is from Kenya. Ooh. And we made sure to label her in the most obvious paint job possible so your stupid, moronic, simple normie brain will recognize she's the token diversity one instantly. Labels are good. Look at us, we're really pushing forward from the past by throwing two of our main male characters in the trash. We flat out lied in our marketing promos and said they're still in the show, when in actuality we couldn't care less. We like to pretend we still care about the fans by throwing tertiary characters in the mix still, but really, we don't care what the fans think. We don't care. Look at us, we made Thomas better. This is the Thomas that your kids should be watching. It's so freaking transparent and inauthentic that it's actually kind of hilarious. I mean, really step back and look at what they've turned Thomas the frickin' Tank Engine into. It is absolutely hysterical how pathetic it is. They just want those good boy brownie points in those headlines while at the same time transforming the show into the same mindless drivel as its competitors to make a quick buck. It has absolutely nothing of value to say, no morals told through beautiful visuals, no inspiration behind any of it, and nothing in it that honors its roots. It's just modern day, corporate, mandated garbage. If they want Thomas to be Paw Patrol or Cars so badly, why not just end Thomas and make a brand new train show that has no established lore or fandom that you have to consider? I mean, you might as well at this point. All the soul and creativity and integrity and uniqueness that made Thomas such a wonderful, memorable show for so long, and what the Brenner era tried so hard to recapture, is absolutely gone.
How does it feel to have lived long enough to see all of your favorite franchises go down in flames?
Feels great.
But Unlucky Tug, you're being too harsh. They obviously do care. They wouldn't put Railway Series references in the show still if they didn't care. No. Don't get individual writers confused with the corporation. Michael White cares. Andrew Brenner cared. Mattel does not care. And they're the ones that are making these decisions. Remember, corporations are not your friends. And if there's no profit to be made, then they don't care. So there is no reason to defend them when they make crappy decisions. These characters of 75 years deserve better. The fans that keep your series afloat on the biggest media platforms deserve better. And the legacy of this franchise that the Reverend Wilbert Audrey left us deserves better. Be better, Mattel. There are, of course, more problems in BWBA than just these, but I feel they're pretty minor in comparison. Yeah, Thomas as the narrator is annoying, the body movements are still visual cancer, the fantasy sequences are pointless wastes of running time, etc. But if I went into detail on everything wrong, we'd be here for 18 hours. But the real question is, was it all worth it? Did this allow Mattel to reach their end goal? Did it make Thomas more marketable and successful? Were all these changes and problems they willingly created justified?
Oh no!
The show's over. These changes were all for nothing, and it just put Thomas in a worse place than it was before the reboot. BWBA was the killing blow that officially sunk the ship. But let's make something clear here. BWBA is not what killed Thomas. It didn't help, and only caused the ship to sink faster. But what killed Thomas was undoubtedly Mattel's lack of internal communication and their failure to market the brand properly. It's not a secret that Mattel is an inept company. They continually cut corners with their products, not just for Thomas, and their stocks have dropped lower than ever in the last 5 years. Had Mattel known what they were doing from the start, they would have taken all the steps necessary to make sure the show was as exposed to their audience as possible. Without exposure, kids aren't seeing it, and if kids aren't seeing it, they aren't interested. Moving Thomas to Netflix this year was a good move, but it's way too late to make a difference now. Mattel let the show rot on PBS at a once-a-day, 6 a.m. time slot for years, in the US anyway, where it was getting no traction at all, and with no other way to watch the new content other than fan uploads on YouTube. Then they put it on Nick Jr., a channel you have to pay for, again limiting their reach to their audience, and it died on there only after 2 years. I never understood why they didn't just upload the new episodes to the official YouTube channel weekly and throw a bunch of ads on them. Surely that would have gotten them some traction. If the show had proper exposure in 2015, 2016 or so, when it was still good, we'd probably be in a much better place now, and BWBA wouldn't have had to exist at all. Mattel immediately concluded the show wasn't doing well because kids weren't responding to the more grounded, fan-liked content, but that just wasn't the case. Kids weren't responding because there wasn't an easy way to watch it. Mattel's hubris and their inept management caused the Thomas ship to hit the iceberg years ago, and it's been sinking slowly ever since. BWBA was the ship breaking in half. It was going to sink regardless what they did, but after that ship broke, it was all under the water within 5 minutes. So if you've made it this far, you're probably wondering, Unlucky Tug, why did you just make a 45-minute rant on BWBA? Who was this for? Chances are most people already agree with me that BWBA is bad, and I'm more than likely not going to change the mind of those who like it. We all know the problems, so what was the point? I've asked myself what is the point of this several times while editing this. So many times, in fact, I almost dropped the video entirely midway through. However, I pressed on. The point of this video was not to change the minds of anyone. I'm not trying to use straight facts to diss on the people who like BWBA for Twitter clout or anything like that. I made this video to get the message out there that the majority of us fans don't approve of what Mattel is doing with our favorite franchise. If my words manage to reach a single person who can make a difference for the better in the way Thomas is treated, then it will all have been worth it. And if it doesn't, then us fans will continue to do so in our own content. And this video will stand on YouTube as a reminder to generations of fans to come of what not to do. Because I wholeheartedly believe what Mattel has done with Thomas is the greatest example possibly ever of how not to handle a beloved franchise. If you actually managed to sit through my nasally monotone voice long enough to get to this point, then that's proof enough you did so because you love that stupid little blue tank engine and that old guy that created him as much as I do. And all our differences and preferences aside, I think we can all unitedly agree that they both deserve to be respected as much as possible. None of us are asking for nor expect perfection, but please, treat Thomas better than this. How to fix BWBA. Now, let's get into the more interesting part of this video. The part that I'm actually really excited to talk about. The part where we fix BWBA. Okay, picture this. It's 2017. You're Andrew Brenner. Ian McHugh has just convinced the higher-ups that this stupid international crap is a good idea, and Mattel has given you a crazy list of demands that you need to somehow work into the show. 1. You have to take Thomas around the world to these specific countries and dedicate half the new seasons to that. 2. You have to introduce 2 spanking new girl characters into the main cast and make them interesting. And 3. You have to somehow find a way to write Edward and Henry out of Tidmouth Sheds and make the main cast more gender equal. And all the while, you have to do this in a way that doesn't massively piss off the fans. The pressure's on. So, how did Brenner do it? Simple. He didn't. He didn't accomplish any of these well. But I don't blame him. It's a lot of pressure, and the writing team was apparently very rushed during all of this. I don't blame the man for jumping ship when he did. At least he gave it a good try before parting ways. He wrote the movie to the best of his abilities with the constraints put on him, and ended it with a cliffhanger as a jumping off point for the show, which they didn't follow up on for some reason. After 5 years of juggling making the Thomas universe work while satisfying Mattel's demands, only to have them drop this bombshell on him and expect him to oblige, I don't blame the guy for wanting to get off before the ship sank. His interests were in other projects he already had his fingers on. Mad respect, brah. You did what you could. So what do you do? How do you make these seemingly ridiculous requests work? How do you write all of this crap in without pissing off the fans? How do you make the impossible possible? I'll tell you how. This is how I would have done it. First of all, and most importantly, Season 21 needed to be used way more effectively as a transition season. I mean, the whole reason Season 21 was greenlit in the first place was to place the stepping stones to the reboot, which it didn't do well at all. I don't dislike Season 21. In fact, if you view it as like a finale season to the era, minus that dreadful episode, I think it's quite good. There's a lot of character arcs that seem to come to their conclusive ends in it. I think the episodes are out of order, but there's an episode that implies Diesel is going to change his ways, finally. Gordon and Spencer put an end to their long, 14 seasons long rivalry, and James has the biggest crash he's ever had as a result of doing that screeching brakes thing he's been doing for seasons that everyone hates. We even got some old friends back to be on the screen one last time before it's all over. It's actually a pretty good season to end things on, in all honesty, but it was not a good setup to a reboot. It fails to set up all the crucial elements on that list properly. So, let's do that. Rebecca. Rebecca needs to be introduced to fans and be proven to be a quality asset before they start shoving her down our throats. As they did it, she just shows up out of nowhere in Season 22 and she's just in Tidmouth Sheds immediately. I hate that, so we're gonna fix that. I would introduce Rebecca early on in Season 21 as the season's token newbie, but you don't treat her as if she's a new main character. You effectively do what they did before with Emily. When Emily was introduced in Season 7, no one expected her to be a new main. Everyone just thought, oh cool, another new train. Her character was established, she appeared a couple times, and that was that. Then in Season 8, they really started pushing her and giving her leads. And by Season 9, she was in Tidmouth Sheds without replacing anyone. It was a gradual transition and thus felt fairly natural. We're going to basically do the same with Rebecca. She's introduced at the beginning of the season just as any other new character, and she has an arc that spans a couple episodes. I said before, what makes Rebecca a bad character is that she lacks a defined character and flaws. She's never put through a trial. A good character has flaws, and that's what makes them interesting. So I'm gonna give Rebecca some. She's going to have a notable lack of confidence. She's going to have a wheel slip problem that she's rather embarrassed about. A real life issue with bully designs like her. Sir Topham Hatt brought her to Soto to help Gordon with Expresses, and the thought of being replaced by a much more modern Express engine scares Gordon, so he instantly takes a disliking to her. Thus, Rebecca confides in Henry for advice about getting Gordon to warm up to her, about her wheel slip problem, about what he does when he feels pressured, etc. And the two blossom a friendship. That's 2 prominent character dynamics with 2 main characters established with a million different directions you can take it. And after that arc of the season completes, she just appears throughout the season occasionally, as others do, like Salty or Diesel or Paxton. Make her feel like a natural part of the railway. Now we have to tackle the part we're all dreading. Writing out Edward. I don't think there is a perfect way to do this without pissing some fans off, but we're gonna try regardless. Again, I still don't see why they couldn't just add births to the shed, but whatever, I digress. Towards the end of the season, you give Edward a more proper, respectful send-off episode. I don't like the idea of Edward leaving Tidmouth at all, but I do think it could work if done well. I do think there is some merit to Edward choosing to leave the sheds willingly, to mentor someone. That seems in character for him. Maybe just not with him. Philip at Wellsworth doesn't even make any sense. He's the Knapford pilot! Ugh, whose idea was this? It really did seem like an intentional middle finger to fans with that, pairing the most beloved, untouchable fan favorite character ever with the one guy that almost every fan universally loathes. It could have been interesting, if they actually bothered to do something with it, but they didn't. Guess they couldn't be bothered. Philip even got an episode in season 22, and Edward is nowhere to be seen in it. And then Edward just, ceased to exist after season 22 anyways, so it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Who cares about continuity, right? You want to know who I think would have been the perfect character to pair Edward up with? Rosie. Rosie was just reintroduced in season 21 for seemingly no reason at all. We all thought that they had big plans for the character. I thought the plan was she was going to move into Tidmouth Sheds, but instead they did nothing. She just ended up falling into the background yet again. Just read now. I just want to point out, I love the irony of how they made a big deal about redesigning Rosie, making her red so she'd no longer be a token, obvious girl stereotype anymore, only to have her lead in one episode that's about her dealing with relationships. And then they threw her away after that. Like, oh my god, was this whole thing one big practical joke? Rosie is and always has been a total blank slate and without purpose. She's the perfect young character for Edward to take under his wing and shape in his image, in my opinion, and was reintroduced into the series at a perfect time for this opportunity. So Rosie joins Edward at Wellsworth Sheds, and they spawn a mentor and student character dynamic that appears in episodes throughout the next few seasons. We actually see a brief glimpse of what this could be, and Rosie is red. When Rosie is venting her troubles to Edward, it's very brief and it didn't mean anything, but it put ideas in my head. She's a much better character to pair up with Edward than that spawn of Satan himself, Philip. With My Way, we've accomplished writing Edward out in a way that fans might not totally hate, and in the process we've given Rosie, a character previously with no purpose at all, a purpose. And I think there's something special in that. Now we tackle Henry. So how am I going to deal with Henry? Simple. I'm not. In my version, Henry stays at Tidmouth. Simple as that. I really like the idea of him and Rebecca becoming close friends, so I'm keeping him where he is. So season 21 ends, and all of our crucial elements are now properly set up. Rebecca is firmly established, Edward is paired off with Rosie, and there is now a spot open in Tidmouth Sheds. Now here comes the movie. Big world, big adventures, and we have to tackle the international stuff. As I said earlier, I don't hate the idea. I think the concept of taking Thomas on this big international tour could be really fun if it was done right. It's not unheard of. Real engines like Flying Scotsman have gone all over the world on tours. It's just the movie tackles the concept in the stupidest way. Thomas meets Lightning McQueen, who gives him the idea to go across the world. So he just decides to follow this car he met the day before onto a ship, somehow, and they go off to Africa. Then wacky hijinks happen, and they take him all over. And Sir Topham Hatt goes on this wacky adventure to track Thomas down when he could have just called the port the ship was going to and told them to put a halt on the blue steam engine aboard. Wouldn't have been that hard, really. Whatever. Point is, the movie is supremely dumb. So I'm going to change things quite a bit, but keep the central idea. Thomas is going on a trip around the world. Here's the plot. Children all around the world write Sir Topham Hatt to tell him they love his engine from the books they've read. And they all ask if Thomas can come and see them one day. Sir Topham Hatt learns that Thomas is quite a famous worldwide phenomenon. Yeah, it gets pretty meta. The decision is finally made that he is going to take Thomas on an international trip around the world to show off his famous little blue engine. Topham actually joins Thomas in my version, and he stays with him the whole time. And for the sake of keeping their crucial dynamic in the show, Annie and Clarabelle join too. Sir Topham Hatt leaves Mr. Percival in charge of the railway, and we did see this in the movie briefly. I like that, so we're going to keep it. And they're off! Along the way, Thomas meets Nia and befriends her. I don't totally know how you would write this, but you could find a way to have Nia accompany them on their travels. Perhaps Thomas breaks down due to a poor decision on his part, and then Nia comes along and helps him along to the next destination, and then she sticks around. In my version, Nia looks really shabby. She's still orange, but the color is faded, she has rust marks, she's missing a few parts, she doesn't have a number, and it's very evident that she is not taken care of well. Throughout the film, Nia proves her worth in some way that really impresses Sir Topham Hatt. She later explains that she no longer has a home. The line that she ran on is nearing closure and her friends were already sent away for scrap, and it wouldn't be long before she was too. She's not really looked after by anyone and has no ties left in Africa. Topham says he's happy to give Nia a home. Arrangements are made and he sends Nia to Sodor at the end of the film. Thomas and Topham watch Nia's ship depart, and then they continue on their world tour to their next destination. The movie ends. Season 22. Now we get back to the show and we have to tie all this stuff together somehow. Season 22 will have the same basic structure as before. Half the episodes are international, half are on Sodor. However, they take place at the same time. The Sodor episodes take place while Thomas is gone. You know, actual continuity. The season starts where the movie left off. Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle experience foreign adventures in different countries, they meet new characters, etc. Not totally unlike how the actual episodes play out, except now we have some actual continuity, a reason for Thomas being there, and more interesting integral characters involved. We're giving the audience a reason to care and to be invested in these episodes. I would also chop down the amount of countries used per season to just one. For example, season 22 would be Thomas's time in China, and then he leaves at the end. Season 23 would be India, etc. More time for each country means more time can be spent on each of these new international characters, as well as having episodes just focused on Thomas. More episodes like the Young Bao one, please. Back on Sodor, the episodes take place while Thomas is away. We see how things have changed a bit to accommodate Thomas and Topham being gone. We see Mr. Percival has stepped up to the plate as the standing controller. Mr. Percival has always been such a tertiary character that no one ever really thinks about. The idea of him becoming a main is so novel to me, so we're just going with it. Why not? Nia arrives to Sodor in the first episode. She's restored, repainted, she gains a number, and she's sent to work on Thomas's branch line. Percy, who's been doing Thomas's work as well as his own, is happy for the help, although he doesn't like Nia at first because he fears she may be a permanent Thomas replacement. He later learns to accept her and the two become friends. I feel like there could be a fun character dynamic there, because as it is currently, Nia doesn't have any interesting dynamics with anyone. Again, same with Rebecca. If you want us to like Nia, you have to do something interesting with her. I gave her a little backstory already. Now it's time to give her some specific characters she interacts with. Percy seems like a good, obvious one to start with. As Nia is taking over for Thomas on his branch line, Percy tells her that she can sleep in his open berth at the sheds. Rebecca, meanwhile, is still doing her best to fit in and trying to make good graces with Gordon. There's an episode centered around them and getting Gordon to like Rebecca, but Gordon still stubbornly refuses. Forever and Ever is a horrible episode, but I don't dislike the idea of Gordon being the one refusing to accept change. It's a good lesson to learn that sometimes change is good, but having Nia, the new one, who willingly chose to leave her country and friends, be the one to basically tell Gordon to suck it up that she replaced his old friend, was such a terrible choice. This moral would have been more appropriate and less condescending if it was said to Gordon by Edward or Henry, the ones that chose to leave, not the one that replaced them and chose to be there. If you want Gordon to accept change, show us that character development. Do not lazily preach it. Gordon's going through a rough patch with Thomas being gone and a new controller in charge, Edward's moved out, and all the while, he still has this fear deep inside him that this new modern express engine may replace him. And what's worse, she won't leave him alone. At some point, Gordon gets himself into a really tricky situation, and Rebecca is the one that saves him. Gordon rethinks his position, and Rebecca finally succeeds in winning him over. Later on, Rebecca notices the empty spot open in the sheds, and she suggests if she can sleep in it, and Gordon happily agrees. Rebecca joins the Tidmouth crew, and her spot is actually earned after a whole season's worth of character development. We now have our 3 girls at Tidmouth, and Henry is still there and very much a part of the show. You're probably thinking, this is cool, Tug, but it's going to be weird having several seasons where Thomas doesn't interact with any of the Sodor characters. And you're right. But you find ways to ride around that. Perhaps you do an episode where someone misses Thomas and you show an imagination sequence with them together. Or an episode with a flashback sequence that recreates a past scene when Thomas was present. Or you have an episode that just very clearly takes place before the trip when Thomas was still on Sodor, a la Toad's Bright Idea style. There's always ways around it. And like I said before, a talented writer can make anything work. And that's it, chaps. We've done it. We've checked off all the crazy demands on Mattel's list and made it work in the show. We established Rebecca and Nia and made them likable and interesting. We effectively wrote out Edward and at the same time gave Rosie a purpose. We got our 3 girls at Tidmouth Sheds. We've added continuity and more integral characters to the international episodes, so we give a crap about them. And we made the concept of Thomas going around the world not totally ridiculous. And then, after all that, at the very end of season 24, or whenever they decide to end the international endeavor, Thomas and Topham finally return home in the season finale, and everyone has a heartfelt reunion. A well-anticipated, fitting, emotional end to what very well might be the last episode of the series. And the episode's title? Thomas Comes Home. Now, wouldn't that have been nice?